The Binding of Megtheridon. Illidan Stormrage's army crashed against the Black Temple and drew the wrath of its defenders. Megtheridon had infused orcs with his blood, transforming them into crimson-skinned, battle-crazed warriors called Fellorcs. Demons fought alongside these soldiers, training the Legion's war machine on the invaders. They bathed the terrain outside the walls in emerald fire, but it wasn't enough. Illidan and his followers cut their way through the Legion's defenders and confronted Megtheridon himself. Illidan, Lady Vashj, Akama, and Kael'thas Sunstrider were formidable on their own, but together they were unstoppable. For all his terrible strength, Megtheridon succumbed to his enemies with alarming speed. Illidan could have killed Megtheridon, but the Pit Lord was more useful to him alive than dead. He had seen what the demon's blood had done to the Fellorcs. It had transformed them into bloodthirsty creatures who lived for only one thing: war. Illidan could use such single-minded soldiers in his own army, and with Megtheridon's blood, he could create even more. Illidan appeared before the rest of the Black Temple's defenders. He offered them a simple choice: bend the knee or face oblivion. Some chose death, but most accepted Illidan as their new master. Though many were Fellorcs, demons also bowed their heads in subservience. The fact that Illidan allowed demons into his army appalled Kael'thas and Akama, but he assuaged their fears. Forging a pact with demons was an opportunity. They could reveal much about the Legion's strengths and weaknesses. This knowledge could aid Illidan and his allies when Kil'jaeden inevitably retaliated against him. That retaliation came much sooner than Illidan expected. On the heels of victory, the fiery visage of Kil'jaeden appeared before him and his followers. The Demon Lord had learned of Illidan's insurrection on Outland. He trusted Illidan even less than he had before, but he believed the former Night Elves was useful. Illidan had gathered new allies like Kael'thas, and his army had grown. Kil'jaeden was still confident he would manipulate Illidan. Demons were cunning creatures, and it was not uncommon for them to betray each other in search of power. That was exactly how Kil'jaeden saw Illidan's recent transgressions. His servant had claimed Outland as a prize. Kil'jaeden demanded that Illidan return to Azeroth and finish off the Lich King. If he obeyed, Outland would be his to do with as he pleased. If he disobeyed, Kil'jaeden would do everything in his power to rip the Broken Realm from Illidan's control and destroy the former Night Elf. For Illidan, this ultimatum was a stroke of good fortune. He needed more time before he could begin his true war against the Legion, and Kil'jaeden had given him just that. Illidan Stormrage once again feigned subservience and rallied his army to invade Azeroth. Using one of the many portals in Outland, he crafted a new gateway back to that world. He did not take the full might of his forces with him. Illidan left behind Akama and some of his other followers to secure Outland in his absence. The Ascension. When Illidan Stormrage and his army arrived on Azeroth, the Lich King's worst fears were realized. Kil'jaeden had sent his servants to vanquish him for good. They had determined that they wielded formidable magics that helped them reach Northrend with astonishing speed. Arthas Menethil had no such way to hasten his journey. By the time he set foot in Northrend, Illidan's forces were already marching toward Icecrown Citadel. There were only one route by which Arthas could reach the Lich King before his enemies did. He plunged into the forgotten corridors of Azul-Nerub, the Nerubian kingdom that stretched below the earth. It was not an easy path, nor was it a safe one. Azul-Nerub was ancient, a place built when the world was young. Minions of the old gods lurked in its depths, and they were determined to stop Arthas from helping his master. And Arthas was just as determined to find a way through the Forgotten City. In desperation, he cleaved through the old god servants and emerged at Icecrown Glacier before Illidan. In preparation for war, the Death Knight rallied every undead he could find in the frozen wastes. Illidan was surprised at the sudden appearance of Arthas and the Scourge, but he was not deterred. Battle erupted in the shadow of Icecrown Citadel. Neither side took prisoners. This was not a war for conquest. It was one for total annihilation. As the fighting wore on, Arthas rode out to meet Illidan in a one-on-one combat. Though his energies were dissipating, the Lich King infused some of his remaining power into Arthas. It was a dangerous gamble that pushed the entity even closer to the edge of oblivion. But it was the only chance he had to survive. If Arthas failed, the Lich King would fall, and so too would the rest of the Scourge. But if the Death Knight succeeded, he would turn the tide of battle against the Blood Elves and the Naga. In full view of the two armies, Arthas Menethil fought Illidan Stormrage. Frostmourne clashed against the former Night Elves' legendary warglaives, the Twin Blades of Azeroth. Bolstered by the Lich King's infusion of power, Arthas gained the upper hand. Frostmourne sliced into Illidan's flesh and nearly killed him. Yet, Arthas never delivered the final blow. The Lich King's will urged him to go to the Frozen Throne as fast as possible. As Arthas sought out his master, the Scourge slaughtered as many of the Blood Elves and Naga as they could. Illidan, and what was left of his army, retreated to Outland in disgrace. Illidan was gone, but that did not change the fact that the Lich King's power was continuing to bleed through the crack in the Frozen Throne. The Lich King would eventually fade from existence altogether, his energies dissipating into Northrend's frigid air. There was but one way to escape this fate, to merge with his greatest champion. Through this act, the Lich King could do more than save himself from oblivion. He could finally claim a physical vessel and use it to free himself from the Frozen Throne. The Lich King knew of the inner doubts that had long plagued Arthas, and he believed the Death Knight's mind would be easy to subdue. At his master's command, Arthas stepped before the Frozen Throne and shattered it with a single strike from Frostmourne. The enchanted helm containing the Lich King's spirit tumbled to the Death Knight's feet. If Arthas took up the helm, the Lich King promised him that he would ascend to true power. But the Death Knight hesitated. Was his master merely seeking to use him? Would the Lich King destroy his mind after he donned the helm? He did not know for sure, but one thing was certain. If he did nothing, his master would fade away, and Arthas would be weakened. His enemies were many, and they would do anything to end his existence. Without the Lich King's power to draw on, Arthas feared he would eventually fall to his hunters. Thus, Arthas embraced the unknown and placed the helm upon his head. The Lich King's power flooded into him. Their spirits merged, becoming one of the mightiest entities the world had ever known. The Banshee Queen. Arthas Menethil's departure from Lordaeron did not bring peace to the region. Undead that were still loyal to the Lich King roamed from the center of the Fallen Kingdom to the eastern edge of the Plaguelands. From the southwest, Oathmark Garithos and the remnants of the Alliance were launching offensive into these lands. And trapped between these sides were two rebel undead factions, one led by Sylvanas Windrunner, and the other by the Dreadlord Balzanar, Deathrock, and Varimathras. The Dreadlords sensed the hatred burning within Sylvanas, and they saw her as a useful ally. They offered her a place in their army. In response, Sylvanas gave them war. She had only recently regained her freedom from the Lich King, and she was not about to pledge herself to a new master. What was more, the Dreadlords had helped bring the plague of undeath to Azeroth. They had helped create Arthas, and, by extension, they had made her into a monster. Varimathras was the first to succumb to Sylvanas. To escape defeat, he kneeled before her and promised to act as her obedient servant. Loyalty meant little to demons, a fact that Sylvanas understood well. But she saw Varimathras as a potential weapon. He was powerful, and he knew what tactics the other Dreadlords would use against her. As long as he remained useful, she would allow him to draw breath. Sylvanas gave no quarter to the other Dreadlords. Though her undead were few, she had gained formidable new powers in undeath. Moreover, Her years as a ranger general had made her a master of strategy and battlefield tactics, and she methodically dismantled the Dreadlord's forces. Deatherrock was the next Dreadlord to fall before her wrath. Balnazzar barricaded himself behind the walls of Lordaeron's fallen capital and prepared for the inevitable siege. His efforts were in vain. Sylvanas and her forces stormed through the city, defeating the Dreadlord and seizing the stronghold for themselves. With the capital under her control, Sylvanas now had a refuge to protect herself from her enemies. She named her followers the Forsaken and proclaimed herself their Banshee Queen. Sylvanas ordered the Forsaken to establish a new kingdom in the city's subterranean crypts, dungeons, and sewers. This putrid warren became known as the Undercity. In its toxic corridors, Sylvanas Windrunner and her Forsaken planned their vengeance against the Lich King. The Fracturing of the Light. After Arthas Menethil merged with the Lich King, he remained in Northrend. The task of commanding the Scourge in Lordaeron fell to Kel'Thuzad, though Sylvanas Windrunner and her Forsaken were entrenched in the Undercity. The Lich's undead still dominated much of the Plaguelands. Yet, there was one troublesome enemy that constantly vied for control of Kel'Thuzad's domain. The Order of the Silver Hand had been devastated by the war with the Scourge, but its remaining paladins banded together and vowed to drive the undead from the land. Among these pious warriors was Alexandros Mograine, wielder of the Ashbringer. The weapon, crafted in Ironforged and infused with holy light, had become a thing of legend. It destroyed any undead that it touched, leaving only ash in its wake. As the paladins waged battle against the Scourge, word of Alexandros' deeds spread. He soon took on the same name as his sword. The paladins were elusive and resourceful, and the Scourge had little luck defeating them in open combat. While these holy warriors focused their attention on the undead, another foe infiltrated their ranks unseen. Balnazzar. The Dreadlord had succumbed to Sylvanas' forces in the siege on Lordaeron's capital. But he had not been destroyed. He had used the last of his power to flee into the Plaguelands. Without the help of the other Dreadlords, his command over the undead was limited. He kept to the shadows, fearful that the Scourge might one day discover his presence. In the Paladins, Balnazzar saw a means to protect himself, a means to create a new army. Balnazzar killed a venerated paladin named Saidan Duthron, and then he assumed his form. In the disguise of such a respected holy warrior, the Dreadlord was confident he could twist most of the paladins into his service. Yet, there was one he believed was beyond his reach, Alexandros Mograine. The wielder of the Ashbringer embodied piety and valor. The sooner he was gone, the sooner the other paladins would fall under Balnazzar's influence. Over time, the Dreadlord manipulated Alexandros' eldest son, Renault Mograine. He turned the young human to darkness and forced him to commit one of the gravest of acts. Renault murdered his father with the Ashbringer. Alexandros' corpses and the Ashbringer's sword were later rediscovered by the Scourge. Kel'Thuzad saw a use for both of them. The Lich raised the legendary paladin into undeath and transformed him into an obedient servant. The Ashbringer itself, having been used for such an atrocious purpose, was distorted into an unholy shadow of the sword it had once been. Alexandros' death rocked the paladins. Some of them suspected that a dark force had taken over Saidan Duthron and his closest followers. But they could not prove it. Their suspicions created divisions between the paladins. The holy warriors splintered into two separate factions, the Argent Dawn and the Scarlet Crusade. The Argent Dawn held true to the tenets of the light, but its counterpart did not. Balnazzar retained control over the Scarlet Crusade. It was just the army he had been searching for, and it soon became synonymous with corruption and extremism. Hunt for the Sunwell. North of Lordaeron, the repercussions of the Sunwell's destruction continued to unfold. When Kael'thas Sunstrider and his people destroyed the Sunwell, the massive explosion did not destroy its power. The fount's energy scattered across the land. The Red Dragon Coriolstras discovered this unprotected magic, and he was deeply concerned that it would draw the attention of differing factions and ignite a conflict. His fears were proved correct. Malygos, the aspect of magic, sensed the presence of the Sunwell's energies. He dispatched one of his servants, the Blue Dragon Kelikos, to investigate just how far the power had spread. The Lich King also felt the ripples of energy cascading from the fount. He ordered Darkhan Drathir, the traitor who had delivered Quel'Thalas to the Scourge, to collect this power in the name of the Frozen Throne. Coriolstras scoured the ravaged lands around Silvermoon City and gathered every scrap of power he could. Knowing that time was short, he molded a human avatar named Avina Teague and imbued her with the Sunwell's energies. He gave her false memories, and even created an illusion of a human family for her. He hoped that she would escape the notice of anyone hunting the Sunwell's might. Avina had no idea what she was, nor did she know that the Dark Forces would do anything to claim her power. Caligos and Dark Khan soon encountered Avina, but her true nature remained hidden from them for quite some time. Eventually, Dark Khan unraveled the truth and abducted her, taking her to the site of the ruined Sunwell to siphon the power from her. Caligos and Coriolstras each gave chase, but they found Avina too late. Dark Khan had already begun to take the power of the Sunwell for himself. Using his newfound might, Dark Khan took control of Coriolstras and forced him to battle Caligos. When all seemed lost, Avina finally awakened to her true potential. She realized that the power of the Sunwell was within her. She was capable of wielding it herself. Avina turned her full fury on Dark Khan Drathir and defeated him. After the dust of the battle had settled, Avina Teague remained in Quel'Thalas under the protection of Lorthim Artheron, one of the Blood Elf's highest-ranking rangers. Caligos stayed with her, living under the guise of a half-elf named Kalik. For years, he personally watched over her and kept her presence a secret from the world at large. Heralds of Shadow. Far from Quel'Thalas, Garona was on the hunt. She had hounded Shogal and his Twilight's Hammer cultists across southern Kalimdor, slowly whittling away at their numbers. Her prey was cunning, but so was she. Garona gave no quarter to her foes. She vowed not to stop killing until she had sunk her daggers into Shogal's heart. Garona's persistence infuriated Shogal. She had struck from the shadows, disappearing as soon as she had slain one of his cultists. Shogal set traps and laid ambushes for Garona, but she always escaped them. As the days wore on, the old god's whisper thundered in his mind. They were angry. He was taking too long to deal with the meddlesome assassin. Deep within the dense rainforest of Feralas, Shogal found a way to draw Garona out of hiding. At great risk to himself, he sent away his cultists and waited for the huntress. He knew she wanted him dead, and he knew she would never pass up the opportunity to face him, especially when he was without the protection of his followers. Just as expected, Garona struck. The ogre mage and the half-orc assassin grappled in the misty wilds. Garona gravely wounded Shogal, but it was not enough to defeat him. Shogal bested the assassin in combat and brought her under his dominion. Long ago, the Shadow Council had woven mental shackles around Garona's mind, making her into their unwilling servant. The human Archmage Khadgar had unraveled these bonds and given the half-orc freedom. Yet, Shogal knew how to remake them. He forged new mental shackles and transformed Garona into his pet, his assassin. With Garona under his control, Shogal returned to his original quest to awaken the old gods. He took what remained of his Twilight's Hammer cultists and ventured into the sun-scorched deserts of Silithus. Shogal sensed an old god somewhere beneath the golden sands. He felt the entity calling to him, its power stirring in his veins. and he heard its name whispered in his mind. Cthulhu.